The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. These lines, perhaps not surprisingly, were written by an economist, John Maynard Keynes. These are his rooms at King's College in the University of Cambridge, or this is our picture of them, a theatrical impression. The illusions of the theater and film have long been used to give substance to abstraction, visual form to ideas. And we'll use them here to give form to the march of economic ideas and institutions. And here are some of the participants in the parade. This is capitalism, its justification, how it works. The Marxist dissent. The politicians who use and sometimes misuse the ideas. The age-old institutions of colonialism and imperialism. There's the carnival of boom and slump, inflation, depression, unemployment. Much of it centered around the ancient and highly unreliable institution of money. These are part of the show. Some things are even more durably present. Food and famine, land and hunger for land. They always march in the economic parade. Else fails, I can always explain the idea. Let's never forget that one word is worth 1,000 pictures. In looking at the controlling economic ideas, there isn't much doubt as to when we should begin. In the last half of the 18th century, the Western world was transformed by a succession of mechanical inventions. Along with the Industrial Revolution went another in economic ideas. This was a world of agriculture, and the reason was simple. Everything the average citizen had or used came from the land. Food, mostly bread grains, leather, wool, flax, all for clothing. Transport was by horses, as it had been for 1,000 years. So most people remained close to home. Men have remembered it as a golden age, better perhaps remembered than lived. The question of food, whence the next meal would come, occupied most people most of the time, as unhappily it still does. It was with this problem that economists were first concerned, and it's where we begin. Until 200 years ago, all economics was agricultural economics. We will on occasion use a computer to animate and illustrate this world. Computers are adaptable machines, and they can be made to reach back in time. Houses will serve us as the index of power and wealth. It's the way we usually measure these things. The castle of the ruler will symbolize the power of the state, and the house of the landlord, the power of landed wealth, and that of the capitalist, his position and power. The cottage of the farm worker shows his lowly position in the scheme of things, and likewise the houses of the industrial workers. Here we see the houses assembled on the landscape as a teacher might put them together in the nursery, to show the place of the occupants in the general scheme of things. Do not be alarmed by simplicity. This was a simple world. And complexity is often a device for proclaiming sophistication or for evading simple truth. The power came from draft animals, and above all, as we see, from the muscles of men and women. There being no machinery, no capital, the capitalist had no appreciable claim on the product. Without these classically wicked men, this surely was an age of innocence and love. Unhappily, it wasn't so. Farm workers were numerous, land scarce. And this, plus social position, education, and the law, greatly favored the landlord. So he was the social ogre. And above the landlord, sometimes frivolous, often oppressive, usually belligerent, and invariably expensive, was the state. The state, in turn, levied a heavy claim on both landlord and worker. The heavy and expensive hand of the state was the concern of the world's first great economist. And the scene was this wet and disenchanting latitude from which my own ancestors, I think wisely, departed. In the second half of the 18th century, Edinburgh, despite or because of its climate, was one of the great intellectual centers of Europe, and its greatest claim to eminence was in economics. It would be reckless in these sensitive days, maybe even a trifle dangerous, to offer an ethnic theory of economics. All races have produced notable economists, except the Irish. They're too artistic or possibly too civilized, or so it will be said. But no one can question the eminence of the Scotch, as in other times we were often called. The only really dangerous competition to the Scotch is from the Jews, and we shall see the principal such competitor, David Ricardo, in a moment. The greatest of the Scottish economists, perhaps the greatest of Scotsmen, was Adam Smith. Economists differ on many matters. Indeed, if they agreed, they might all be wrong. But they do agree on one thing, which is that Smith was the founding father of their subject. He was born, or anyhow baptized, in the small port town of Kirkcaldy on the Firth of Forth in 1723. Smith went to the good local school and then on to Balliol. His impression of Oxford was adverse. Some professors, the public professors, were paid a fixed salary. Smith believed that as a result, they did no work. These professors were a metaphor of Adam Smith's economic system. People do their best work when their reward depends directly on their effort, and when they are free to seek the highest possible reward. Smith thought professors should be paid according to the number of students who thought their lectures worth attending. Let the market decide. There are still a few economists who espouse the ideas of Adam Smith, some of them with real passion. They tend to be less passionate about his system of professorial compensation. They don't advocate it for themselves. After Oxford, Smith returned to Scotland, and at 27, he became professor first of logic and then of moral philosophy at the University